Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar about product regulatory risks, brought to you by the Institute of Export and International Trade. And this is the latest in a series of webinars we are doing about trading in uncertain times, which we began at the end of last year. My name is William Barnes-Graham, the Senior Content Editor at the Institute, and I will be your host for the next 45 minutes or so. Next slide, please. So we're going to begin today's webinar with a poll to understand a little bit more about you, our audience. So I'm just going to launch the poll now. So as many of you will hopefully know, new rules were introduced for imports into Britain from the EU on New Year's Day. We are here looking to gauge to what extent you have been impacted by this so far, albeit it is still quite early on in the year. So the options there range from significantly impacted, minimally impacted, not at all impacted so far, not impacted but you expect to be, and I'm not sure / too early to tell. While you're answering that poll, just a couple of quick housekeeping notes. Firstly, you can contact me with any comments or questions using the question panel on the control window to the right-hand side of your screen. We hope to get to a number of your questions towards the end of the webinar, though please bear in mind we have received a lot of questions in advance, so we'll not be able to get to all of your queries today. But if you feel as though your question has not been answered, please do review our technical helpline or training and consultancy offerings, which we will be talking about later in the webinar. And a tip on questions, if your questions are easy for me to understand and read, I am more likely to ask them, so please do try to keep them quite concise and clear. Secondly, you will receive access to today's slide pack and a recording of the webinar in a follow-up email we will be sending over the next day or so. So please do try to listen in carefully to today's presentation and look out for those slides actually, because we'll be including a lot of links which we can't obviously allow you to click on in the presentation itself, but you'll be able to click on those at a later time. So I'm going to close the poll now and share the results. So it's quite a mixed field today. A fifth of you have said you are significantly impacted by the new rules, 20%, and 27% of you saying minimally impacted. So about just under 50% of you are impacted in some way already. 16% of you have not been impacted at all so far, and 17% of you not yet been impacted but expect to be. So over 50% if you count that are going to be impacted in some way by these new rules. Another 20% of you are not sure or say it's too early to tell. Thank you everyone for responding to the poll there. On the next slide though, it is my delight to introduce you to our speaker today, who is Rob Booth, a trade and customs specialist at the Institute's Academy, and will be joined later on by Rosanna Versa for the Q&A. Rosanna is a customs and trade consultant at the Institute. But Rob, just to begin with, it's early on in the year, but does a response to that poll surprise you in any way?
I don't think there's any too big surprises there, Will. Thanks for having me in this afternoon, and good afternoon, everyone else. I think it is fairly representative of what's going on out there across wider industry. I think we've got existing changes that we'll come to terms with in terms of more general customs procedures and requirements, customs declarations, for example. And then we see the more regulatory aspect for your agri-food as well, kicking in from January the 1st also, but with more to come. So I think that there's always going to be a section there that's perhaps not as informed as they hope to. So today and other sessions like this, I'm sure we'll be able to fill some of those gaps for you.
Thanks, Rob. But anyway, a lot to get through today. So I'll pass over to you on the next slide to say a little bit more about the series of webinars this is part of, and to go into the presentation itself. So over to you, Rob.
Cool. Thank you, Will, and again, welcome everybody. So this is the latest webinar in our series of trading in uncertain times, and not to put any doubts into people's minds about what they're doing with their customs and trade operations. I'm sure there's a lot of good work going on out there, and we're witness to that in all the training and the individual support that we provide. But this particular suite of support is there to guide you through this period of significant transition, and also that unknown element that may be ahead of us in our trading operations. So what the Institute of Export can offer, other than its traditional training and educational support, is very specific support around this particular area of trade. And around European trade, potentially this is an area where we hear a lot of kind of rhetoric every couple of days, it seems, at the moment. So we're on hand to provide that technical support, whether it's through news alerts, or there's the telephone helpline that you can contact for specific inquiries. Speak to some of our trade experts, and also this webinar is part of that wider series as well, focusing on individual topics such as product regulatory risk like today, and just trying to help you fill some of those gaps as we move through the different requirements. And we're still moving through that timeline as well for the border operating model for the UK as well. So this whole new package is designed to give you that peace of mind and a bit of reassurance about the good work that you are doing, and perhaps some of the areas you need to focus on as a priority going forward as well. Okay. So for today's session, product regulatory risk, it's an area that can evolve quite quickly. We've had the Trading Cooperation Agreement in place now since January last year. So we're going to have a look at some of the broader impacts on export and import and the trade flows, and that timeline is going to be a common theme that we refer back to. We're going to take a very close look at some of the sanitary and phytosanitary risks. So for those of you involved in moving food products, agricultural produce, even machinery involved in those processes as well, and some of those plants and plant-based items also fall under the range of industries that are affected by SPS measures. As we are focusing on the uncertainty, though, we do have to look at the Trading Cooperation Agreement a little bit closer, and we'll have a look at some of those sector provisions more broadly, where the agri-food products especially are affected. So we'll draw on some of that detail and highlight what's in place and what potentially could be at risk as discussions change and evolve, positive and negative. We've got to be able to respond to these and be as agile as possible during these uncertain times. Then we have some considerations around licensing and product restrictions as well. And so this is sometimes an area that we don't experience much of when we're moving our food products in and out of the UK. But there are some particular products which are of a higher risk, subject to greater controls, and perhaps even restricted as well. So we just want to raise awareness of some of those key topics that you can then take away and add into some of your daily or weekly or monthly checks and due diligence that you do when working with customers and suppliers of agri-food products. And then we'll have a look at some of the other considerations, as there always is something else to consider with this, but especially with food producers, rules of origin is an area we'll have a closer look at as well. Okay. So just to begin with, the border with the EU, as we've been working with now since January last year, we've had the border operating model, which was introduced to help define and clarify how the UK customs infrastructure and the ports and the procedures, how everything would work and play out depending on the product type. And this is something that the border operating model has been quite good at illustrating, is those trader journeys depending on the product type. So I hope that that's something that we have viewed and are keeping up with, as it is revised on a regular basis, the most recent being November last year. So within this document that defines the requirements, and that comes to documentation, procedures, the parties involved, what the obligations are, you'll find all the information in there for those product groups. A very big part of this is the timeline of introducing the customs and SPS controls that apply to those agri-food products. So we'll take a much closer look at that in just a second. There's also some clear definitions around controlled goods, which is very significant for those who are wishing to take advantage of easements around customs declarations, being limited only to those falling under the standard category. There's also in the most recent revision details around the continuation of easements for those imports from the Republic of Ireland. So these were confirmed in that most recent update. So make sure that you are keeping up to date with those developments there if you are bringing goods in from the Republic of Ireland. Those same easements that we had access to a month ago will continue for the foreseeable future. We have no date on those. In terms of SPS controls, though, they will still apply to some of those considered the higher risk in the agri-food sections. And then, of course, we have the unique and unprecedented situation in Northern Ireland, and the Northern Ireland Protocol deals very specifically with this. So any concerns or questions around that should consider the Trader Support Service for guidance there. But this border of the EU, the border operating model contained within it, is very much focused on GB EU movements. And of course, more information available on Gov UK, where you will find the link to this actual document contained within the slide pack you'll receive after today. So the timeline, which has been a real key focus for anyone moving agri-food products, this focuses attention on the key areas. So let's look at what we've got this year. So with January, we've seen the introduction of the new pre-notification requirement for all SPS movements, so all those goods that are subject to SPS measures. So your products of animal origin, animal byproducts, fish and their plants and plant-based materials, all included in there, and they require that pre-notification on a new IT system, or relatively new IT system called IPAFs, and this started from 1st of January. So it has been implemented with a fairly reduced data set. So we are at the very early stages of this requirement. So in terms of that data set, it's the basic information around the consignment, the parties involved, the goods. Must make sure we're up on our Latin and understanding the names of our products and the description of the goods, as that's what's called for when selecting them. But very basic information around those consignments. And quite crucially, where this ties in with your customs clearance more generally, references to those notifications need to be passed on to your customs intermediaries to help support the customs declaration input. Just to re-emphasize that point about the imports from the island of Ireland, so obviously qualifying goods from Northern Ireland, unfettered access to the rest of the United Kingdom, but those imports from the Republic of Ireland, they will continue to be able to move under the easements that were available this time as they were in December. So delayed declarations potentially still available for those standard goods, SPS controls applying to those high risk products. So pre-notifications, that's a significant development we've seen this year, which we were planning for and advising companies on. But July is when we will see a real significant change, and what we see as the real introduction of a customs and SPS border where health certificates will need to accompany those products that fall within the scope of sanitary, phytosanitary measures. And those goods would also need to arrive at designated entry points around GB. So these will be the border control posts. So when those goods arrive, they will be entering into an environment where they will be subject to documentary, identity, and perhaps even physical checks as well by those officials that are employed at those locations. So this is going to be quite crucial when it comes to route planning and identifying which ports can actually deal with those types of goods, because different ports will deal with different types of goods. So we have to be very, very careful that we can identify the nature of the ports and the border control posts and what it is that they can process there. But it won't quite be the end of it in July. So we will see a staged introduction from July for those health certificates. So as you can see listed from July, mainly those meat products. But any animal byproducts not for human consumption, they'll be covered by those health certificates. And those high-risk foods or feed not of animal origin, so perhaps those ingredients from far-flung places around the world, they'll be subject to that as well. But from September, that's where we see the dairy products falling into the requirement for a health certificate to accompany those goods. So the supplier needs to be ready for this, and this is where conversations between yourselves and the supplier in the EU needs to be working with their partners, whether it's the obtaining of those certificates or the officials that are involved in certifying those documents as well. So it needs to be a lot of careful planning and preparation for that. We still have that time, but we've got to make sure those conversations are being had so we know that there are no gaps there. And then from November, we'll see the remaining product categories covered by the health certificate. And so all remaining regulated products of animal origin. And that includes the composite food products, which covers a lot of our kind of retail food, processed food, that include both products of animal origin and plant products used as ingredients. They'll be subject to those health certificate requirements from November. So those are the significant dates to look out for this year. So we've started with IPAFs pre-notifications as of January the 1st. The health documentation will accompany goods from July. In addition to this, and in relation to certain products that have inspections carried out at the destination, they will be moving away from those locations to BCPs for those inspections. So some of that may be happening already, and that will then move to the BCPs from July. Or if those facilities aren't available, when they are available and online. And just one other thing to highlight is that for some products, they do obtain the organic status because of the production methods that are involved. And so they have additional certification to consider, and certificates of inspection will be required for those imports from July also. So with that pre-notification then on IPAFs, DEFRA have been very good at providing information in fairly bite-sized content, but it's quite disparate and there's a lot of stuff going on all over the place. So together with this webinar, we have included some very specific and targeted links that relate to each of these categories you can see here listed on the screen. So make sure that you have those to hand, because that's where you're going to find up-to-date information and guidance on those particular categories. If anything else was to change, this is where you would see that information. So look out for those on the pack that follows this webinar. It will also include a very short and simple step-by-step video on completing those IPAFs notifications. So any of those products falling in these categories you can see here, live animals, that high-risk food and feed, not of animal origin, can catch quite a lot of different products, not just food. It could be materials as well that are used in food preparation, could fall under that as well. Composite food products, plants, etc. It's all going to be included there. So make sure that you're registered, the parties you're working with are also registered, and you're all getting the applications in on time. The really operationally, the really important thing to consider is the timing for these notifications. So it's been widely promoted that these can be submitted 4 hours prior to the arrival, but this won't apply to all categories. Generally, if we look at this from a kind of risk perspective, those deemed higher risk will still need to be following the 24-hour timeline, but for those of a lower risk, so perhaps those composite food products and more generally products of animal origin, plants and plant products that arrive by road on the ferry crossings or through the tunnel from Europe, then they could avail of the 4-hour timing requirement. Now, one thing to note again, and this is about dates in the diary, from July the 1st, that 4-hour provision may not still be there. it will be left to individual port authorities to decide whether that will continue or revert back to the standard 24 hours. So we've got to be aware of this. We've got to make sure that we're following that latest guidance on these product categories, because it will be different depending on the nature of the products. Okay. Potential risks then. So we've just looked at what's happening in terms of meeting current requirements. We have SPS measures because we have our different regimes. The EU has their policy on SPS, and we have our own. Now, where we have the potential risk is where the trade agreements change direction, or the tone of conversation changes direction significantly. And the first thing that will hit us is going to be those higher tariffs. These particular products are subject to higher tariffs and potentially quotas anyway. So with the Trade and Cooperation Agreement, the criteria around rules of origin is very helpful for mitigating against that duty liability. Potentially, if you can meet those rules of origin, you're going to be reducing that quite drastically. But that is going to be a big impact initially. So to keep up with this, ultimately it's about keeping up with the regulations and the procedures that are in place for these different types of goods. We've gone through just a couple of those measures, and that's reflected pretty much the same in principle for exports going into the EU, and has done since January last year. Ultimately, this is about taking responsibility and understanding your legal obligations. And where SPS is concerned, you've still got that obligation to meet, regardless of Incoterms. If you're supplying those goods, you're going to be providing health certificates, and importers likewise have got to deal with those notifications and making sure the authorities know those goods are arriving. Keeping up with those developments, though, in individual member states is also very crucial, because we may have those trading block wide requirements, but at a member state level we may find individual requirements. In Spain, for example, we may find there's additional declarations required for certain goods, because that's decided at the national level to support SPS measures more broadly. And then the risk to mutual recognition agreement. So this ultimately leaves an environment where we have technical barriers operating at various different levels and different scales and different scopes, because it's set at perhaps more national levels as opposed to that whole trading block. So that's really going to open up potentially a difficult situation where we have to conform with more individual standards as opposed to that one set of unified standards. So within the agreement then, where particularly could it be at risk? So let's have a look at organic products. I mentioned this as part of the timeline. So there's a recognition there of the control bodies that certify products as having organic status. So there's an equivalence there. Those bodies are recognised in both parties, in both the EU and the UK. So that means that our goods, having met production criteria, can be exported under that organic status, and therefore access the market carrying that kite mark. Now, where that would be at risk, obviously, is where that recognition goes, and we're going to have potentially organic products being made in the UK, but there's no recognition of the control bodies that then certify that status. So that's going to be a significant challenge there. For trade in wine, there's some common principles around labelling. So again, it's having more than one system to recognise these products. So administratively, it's going to add quite a bit of time and effort and cost ultimately to label these products to enter them onto the market. One thing we do have is simplified certification, so that if those wines are produced in either party and exported to the other, there will be self-certification in place, not the historic VI1 certificate. So that is at risk if there is a breakdown and escalations in problems with EU trade talks. The UK is, however, looking to remove that requirement anyway for all imports as of January the 1st. So that's the latest guidance. And that will mean that imports perhaps are easier to deal with, but for our exports, if that self-certification goes, then we're going to have that challenge. And then for fisheries, so different aspects of this are affected by the TCA, but ultimately access to fishing waters, well, we would have that unilateral position to decide what is happening and issuing of licenses, etc. But more generally speaking, in terms of access to the markets and selling of those goods, this is where obviously tariffs and quotas could also come into play with licenses as well. This is where we fall back on more of the WTO level agreements, so a bit more unified there. So there is some protection, but ultimately it means goods are subject to the same treatment as anywhere else in the world where there isn't a trade agreement. So again, that's challenging, but we have that unilateral position to take. And then some other sections which are included more generally, but they reflect international agreements. So if CITES for the protection of endangered species of flora and fauna, so it's an international convention. Movement of these goods would require a permit, depending on how the risk is categorized on the database there, Species Plus. So whenever moving into any or considering any new contracts with suppliers and customers, you've got to be able to identify that status. And you can do this by checking against commodity codes using that tariff lookup tool. It will highlight where CITES may be a consideration. So whenever that's flagged up, you've got to consider this. But again, it's more of an international obligation as opposed to a specific TCA obligation. And wood packaging is something that we have to work to make sure that we have the ISPM 15 standards met, which includes heat treatment and certain marking to represent that treatment taking place. Apologies. Now, this next slide is more a kind of checklist to bear in mind for your standard operations on a regular basis anyway. So these are kind of key checklist points to take on board into your daily operations whenever assessing product requirements for import or export. So commodity code changes, we've seen, well, we normally see changes on an annual basis anyway, but we've had global changes recommended by the WCO, the World Customs Organization, and so we've seen quite broad changes to a lot of products and quite a few that are subject to SPS measures. So we've got to make sure that we're reviewing those on a regular basis to identify the import and export conditions. So some meat products, fish, dairy, fruits and nuts, and preparations of meat and fish as well. We've seen changes there in those commodity codes. So you've got to make sure that we're checking against the tariff lookup to keep up with those requirements. The official certification, in the UK, we have EHC online to actually find export health certificates for products of animal origin, and we have similar health certificates for those of plant origin goods as well. So you can find the appropriate certificate using those online tools. They are specific to different product types with individual terms and conditions, specific treatments that the goods are subject to, forms of sterilization perhaps, and the treatment of the meat and dairy content itself will all be specified in there. So we've got to make sure that we're looking at those changes, and you can sign up for the notifications of any changes to export health certificates where those T's and C's do change. Import conditions and procedures, which reflect all kind of controls and measures related to your goods. We'll make use of the new tools that are available on GovUK, but there is a new tool there that helps give you confirmation of the destination requirements, health certificates, additional marketing requirements, inspection documents will all be specified on those search tools. This checklist that I'm going through is been prepared with a corresponding set of links as well that will take you to the specific section on the bullet points that we're covering. So this is a really helpful one in a practical sense to just kind of keep to hand after today. Okay. For certain types of goods, the company or the location will need to be authorised to supply those goods. So products of animal origin, for example, they need to be listed, and you need to be checking these lists so you can obtain numbers that are used in the health certification as well, especially when it comes to your exports. I mentioned the BCPs that are going to come into scope from July, so identifying which locations deal with what types of products. We've got to be making sure that we're on top of the route, what's happening, who the parties are, and where those goods are going to travel through. And that's part of your general conversations operationally with your freight and customs partners. And then we have transit. So some very important guidance was published late last year around transit. So for goods moving from one EU member state to another via the GB land bridge, there will still be an element of SPS there to consider. So IPAFs notifications will still be required. For those EU-based businesses, you can access that system until July, when requirements will change, so that you need to be a registered establishment in the UK, or you've got a UK-based agent that can do this on your behalf. So those goods still move through, but would require an IPAFs notification, along with the traces elements as well to deal with the return.
Hi Rob, just sorry to intrude, just a quick note on time. So I mean, we're going to get to some questions, so if we could wrap up in the next kind of 5 or so minutes, that'd be great.
Yes, certainly. Yeah, of course. Cheers, Will. Another area where we perhaps aren't too familiar with, but operationally it might be quite distant, but these are things that are very important to consider from a regulatory perspective. Is ultimately these SPS controls are there to prevent the spread of disease and pests and contaminants. And so when there are new risks identified, there are measures in place so that government departments can take the necessary action. The key to this work is obviously communication between all the parties involved, and the exchange of information between authorities helps expedite this process where it's needed. But that's something that has to be in our thoughts when considering those import conditions and procedures, and certain products where that's then identified, it will be stated against the conditions for both for export or import, whether there are those additional considerations. Perhaps there's some safeguard measures there that are being implemented for those goods. And then finally, marketing standards. So to actually put these products on the market, to sell them, and there's lots of different individual marketing standards to deal with depending on your nature of your products. You need to keep up with the information that is in the public domain. We provide updates on this through our newsletters, but you will find product-specific guidance available on the various Gov.uk pages, which we will refer to in the corresponding page for supporting links at the end. Okay. I mentioned rules of origin. So when it comes to processing those goods, we want to make sure that we can identify the product-specific rule, and then we can then work on providing the evidence to help our customers with their claims for preferential treatment. We're also looking back in our supply chain and obtaining evidence from our suppliers to ensure that we're meeting that requirement there. We had a change in the obligations there as of January the 1st, so that anyone making out those statements of origin on commercial invoices for their exports, they should have the evidence in place. And so if you're not manufacturing finished products, you need to have that visibility within your wider supply chain, so you can then confidently make these claims. And where we looked at tariffs, this is going to help minimize that impact if we've got those preferential rates still available. For absolute certainty, though, where there's any doubt around origin, you can obtain legally binding decisions from customs authorities, and they can provide that reassurance then that's legally assured that the origin is what you say it is, with all the appropriate evidence to support it. Now, just to look on an area of significance for not all businesses moving food products, because not all food products are affected by this. So it is fairly minimal, but it's something to be aware of. Import licensing does affect very few food products, but if you're involved in bringing in certain animal byproducts, it's likely there's going to be a consideration there for a license. If, for example, there isn't a health certificate linked to that product, it may actually need an import license to come into the UK, and vice versa, exported to the EU. There's also then the considerations around certain foodstuffs that have restrictions and materials that are used in food preparation. So it might be plastic items that are used in food preparation coming from outside of the EU. They will be subject to additional declarations and voluntary disclosures from suppliers to assure that there is no risk of toxins, for example, within those items. The contact materials I just referred to, that may require the additional declarations. The UK Food Standards Agency is very clear in its guidance on this, which products fall under this, which ones are at risk of that potential contamination. And then the really a significant area of animal pathogens and carriers, so not necessarily the pathogen itself, but those that can carry it, would be subject to license. And depending on the intended use, there's going to be that requirement there to have a license to bring those products into the UK.
Thanks, Rob. I wonder if because I think the next couple of slides, we have the links for the end of the pack we're sending to everyone. So I'm conscious we want to do some Q&A. So maybe if we go to slide 17 and then we can wrap up and do the Q&A if that's okay. Thank you.
Sure, yeah, the references to these following pages will be at the end, yeah. Okay. So just to very quickly recap then, take advantage of the information that is available. Webinars like today, the information we'll provide after today will be very specific on certain categories of food products. You can also get in touch with us to discuss very individual product requirements as well as we move through this timeline for imports into the UK. But also for those exports into the EU, what are the current rules and regulations that your products face? Okay.
Thanks, Rob. A lot to cover, as everyone can see. It's a big area, and we'll be doing more webinars on this very topic over the coming months, because obviously the timeline is coming in throughout the year. As we go into the Q&A, I'm just going to ask another poll, if I may, just asking you if you have a plan in place for the new customs rules, and you can hopefully see the options there. Yes, no, and a couple of no's. In terms of some of the questions we've had in, I mean, we've had a few people asking about IPAFs. So this is one from Martin, who's asked, what information do traders need to be including in the pre-notification to IPAFs? Rob, do you want to start on that one?
Yeah, sure. So at the moment, it is a reduced data set. So that's the first thing to bear in mind with IPAFs. What we see is not necessarily what we're going to see from July, when we start to see a full implementation of IPAFs, but it will be the product information, that Latin name of the product. That's going to be something we need to be very familiar with so that we classify it in the right way. But when going through the submission, it does give you the option to choose a commodity code, so it presents the information in the same way as your tariff lookup tool would present the information. So you can be very specific, and it's about the parties and the date of arrival as well into GB, very important. And the reference that is generated, very important, that makes its way to the customs broker, whoever's completing the declaration, so that two can link and help support customs clearance more generally. So commercial invoices should be the source of most, if not all, of that information.
Thanks, Rob. I'll leave this poll open a bit longer, just give more people a chance to answer. But if I may bring in Rosanna. Hi, Rosanna. Great to have you on board today. We had a question about Northern Ireland. So, I mean, Rob touched on it, but what SPS rules apply to trade between Britain and Northern Ireland, and how can people find out more information about those rules?
Yes, hi, Will, and good afternoon, everyone. So as Rob mentioned in the beginning, the border with the EU covers trade between the EU and the UK, and the Northern Ireland Protocol covers movements between Great Britain and Northern Ireland. So for SPS purposes, the island of Ireland is treated as a single epidemiological unit, and the EU SPS rules apply. That means that since 1st of January 2021, movements of SPS eligible goods from Great Britain to Northern Ireland have had to comply with the EU SPS rules or EU controls to protect animal, plant and public health. There are easements currently in place, which are part of the discussions between the EU and the UK. For instance, authorized traders and their trusted partners or trusted suppliers are able to move agri-food goods between Great Britain and Northern Ireland under a Staminy compliance declaration without the need for official certifications such as export health certificates and phytosanitary certificates. There is also an easement provided by the UK government, the Movement Assistance Scheme, by which the UK government covers the cost of some official certification for movements of agri-food goods from GB to Northern Ireland. This scheme is, the government announced that the scheme will close at the end of December 2023.
Thanks, Rosanna. And I'll just rattle through a few more questions. So obviously, Rob, we've talked about export health certificates and we've got a few questions around them from users. I mean, what do completing these involve for traders? And a question from Irina as well. Is it our EU supplier of the products of animal origin who has to give us the export health certificate for an IPAFs pre-notification? So yeah, export health certificates, if you may.
Okay, yeah, and just to kind of pick the question apart a bit, that there's something I just caught. So from July, we'll expect to see those health certificates accompany those goods. So that's where it's going to support that IPAFs application. That's where we'll start to see the data set expanded and health certificates accompanying those IPAFs notifications. So we'll need to have that kind of in advance of the notifications. Electronic copies can be really helpful to complete those submissions. But of course, with the original health certificates, when they do get raised, they're going to need to accompany those goods. Now, suppliers are going to have to raise those documents, regardless of those Incoterms. They're going to need to be approaching their authorities to obtain it, and also find an official who can do the inspection where it's required, whether it's animal origin or it's a plant-based product. They can then certify and sign off the documents and then travel with the goods. So they've got to make sure that they're making use of that time we have between now and July.
Thanks, Rob. And a couple of similar questions from Francisco around phytosanitary certificates. He says, do you need one in order to lodge the pre-notification? And then he also asks, from July 2022, will digital phytosanitary certificates be acceptable for documentary checks?
So they're going to support products where they may need it at the moment. If they're deemed either higher risk animal origin goods or high priority plants and plant products, which applied last year as well, then that would have supported those applications. How that then transpires into the physical inspections that take place, at the moment, I suppose it's inconsistently applied. Once the PCPs go live and they're operational from July, everything's going to funnel through those, and that's where those inspections will take place. The certification will give the inspectors something to work from, and they'll do those identity checks to make sure the products are what they say they are, they claim to be on the health certificates, and then check the conditions that are laid out on that individual health certificate can be met as well. And then that allows the official to confirm, and then lots of messaging will go on in between all the different systems, but that will help secure the customs clearance and ultimately release of those goods from July.
Thanks, Rob. I hope that's been helpful, Francisco. Just going to share the results of our poll quickly. So thank you everyone for answering. Over half of you do have a plan in place for the new customs rules, and a third of you don't yet, but are planning to, and then only 14% of you no, are not planning to, potentially, for various different reasons there. We'll do a couple more questions. These are slightly shorter format webinars, so forgive me for not doing for extending it too much longer, but I'll do two more questions. One for Rosanna from Lucinda, who asks, how can I find out if the product I trade requires a phytosanitary certificate?
Yes, so the shortest answer would be check on the plant health portal from DEFRA. And if the product is regulated and notifiable, it will require a phytosanitary certificate. We will, as has been mentioned before, we will send links with the PDF copy of the slides, and you can check on the link section for importing plants for additional information. And it's also worth remembering that until 1st of July, the main require is for pre-notification without phytosanitary certificate for most products. Imports of high priority plant and plant products, including seeds and plants for planting agricultural machinery from the EU, also regulated and notifiable plant and plant products from the rest of the world, currently require a phytosanitary certificate. Also, as a general rule, official guidance indicates a list of 15 products that do not require a phytosanitary certificate, and fruit and vegetables that have been processed and packaged, also composite products that contain processed fruit and vegetables, they do not require phytosanitary certificate. Everything else would require a phytosanitary certificate. But again, always double check the official guidance. So the Plant Health Portal DEFRA and the links we will send with the slides afterwards.
Thanks, Rosanna. Really comprehensive answer there. And yeah, as said, we will be sending out that PDF, which will include the links over the next day or so. Just one last question is something which is coming up. So on the 15th of January, my understanding is there's a change of rules for on the EU side for health certification for composite products. Rob, do you want to say a little bit about what this change is and when it's happening?
Yeah, sure. So this is based on legislative changes that happened last year. So at the end of April 2021, new animal health regulations, parts of broader EU safer food control regulations are implemented for plant products as well. It meant that there were changes to the export health certificates that were required for different product groups, but also changes to the terms and conditions within them, and much more focus on the nature of the treatment and the stability of that product as well. So what we're looking at is a scenario now where we have new export health certificates for your kind of your meat and dairy and your kind of standalone food products, but also for those composite food products, they've got a more risk-based approach now being applied, which means those deemed higher risk are going to be subject to greater controls, be it an export health certificate and inspection of the BCP on arrival. To those deemed lower risk, perhaps where they don't contain processed products of animal origin, and they have a shelf-stable nature to them at ambient room temperature, so they could be deemed lower risk. And so this means that the trader could actually benefit from a kind of a flexibility there, a waiver in effect. So the onus then falls more onto the importer providing some form of certification, so of a private attestation, and so that could also mean no controls applied at arrival, and they don't have to arrive at a BCP as well. So it's that kind of risk scoping that's really changed. The key to this is identifying the treatment and the nature of the ingredients, what's actually in that product, checking against the EHC terms and conditions, the guidance notes that you can find on EHC online, and then you can identify where the product sits. There is also a standalone document called a decision tree that DEFRA have produced, which does guide you through the steps to identify what happens at which stage. Is it considered composite? Is it actually considered a standalone and product of animal origin? So I think if traders can take that away, have a look at that, take a look at those links on the checklist that we provide, and then come back to us if there's any further questions, because that takes a bit of navigating, but you know, you want that certainty. And from the 15th of January, the important thing is that those new template EHCs need to be used from that date. Okay, so they have been available for around 6 months, for just under 6 months. But if you have goods already en route to the EU, they could still use the older version up until the middle of March. So there is a bit of a window there, but that's the key change reflective of that legislation introduced last year.
Thanks, Rob. So I think we're going to have to wrap up now. So if we move a couple slides on, and just to I think it's the white background slide. But yeah, apologies everyone, we've slightly overrun on this one. It's always quite ambitious, I think, to cover these technical topics in a short time frame, but hopefully that's given you a flavour of some of the important rule changes which are coming into effect and what you can do to adjust to them. So thank you once again to Rob and Rosanna for the presentation and answers today. Really comprehensive, and as noted, we will be sending the pack, which includes the slides, links as well shortly. So just before we go, this webinar has been the latest in a series about trading in uncertain times, and that is part of a suite of enhanced support helping traders to continue trading despite Brexit rule changes, global supply chain issues, and ongoing geopolitical tensions. As Rob mentioned, this suite includes real-time news alerts. Indeed, keep an eye out for an article in our bulletin this week about the composite rule changes. There's an enhanced telephone helpline for business members, a new live web chat function, a new one-day training course and consultancy, and more webinars just like this one. For more information, please look at the website. But for now, thank you everyone for tuning in. Please do let us know what you thought of today's webinar in the exit survey, and we look forward to seeing you on the next one. Thanks everyone. Bye.
Bye.